Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
Before I introduce this week's guest, a quick story time brought to you by locumstory.com. Today, we'll be reading One Job, Two Job. One job, two jobs, red blob, no job. Elective doc, emergency doc, some in overstock, some in out of stock. This doc is too abused, this doc is underused. This doc can't get sick, say, let's try a brand new trick. For all the docs about to cry, here's an idea you can try. Look into locum tenens assignment, a really great option, you might find it. Don't forget locums pays much better, and you can find assignments in any type of weather. With all this new info trapped up in your thinker, go to financialresidency.com/locumstory and use your mouse to tinker. It's here you'll find the unbiased answers you're after, so you can decide if locum tenens is your next chapter. Our guest today is Dr. Amy Shah. Dr. Shah is a double board certified physician and wellness expert specializing in food allergies, hormones, and gut health. She graduated magna cum laude from Cornell University with a major in nutrition. She went on to complete her medical training at Albert Einstein College in New York, followed by residency training at Harvard and fellowship in Allergy and Immunology at Columbia University. To this day, Amy continues to employ her primary and advanced medical training in a busy practice, but she's well known for helping busy people transform their health using cutting-edge nutritional and medical science. Amy's also known for the concept of circadian fasting, which she talks about at length in her book, I'm So Effing Tired. So in this episode, we talk a lot about why and how we are all so tired. We learn about Amy's journey to burnout and what made her reflect and change her practices. Amy dispels some misnomers that are often used when describing fatigue and exhaustion. For my healthcare practitioners, Amy talks about trying to find balance between being anchored to the research in the conventional sense and also utilizing more novel approaches to help patients. We also discuss circadian biology, and Amy gives some practical tips on ways we can do that immediately to enhance our quality of life. Now, for those who follow Amy on Instagram, you know her name is Fasting MD. So of course we touch on fasting quite a bit as well. For those who don't follow Amy, get on IG, Twitter, LinkedIn, and follow her. I promise it'll be worth your time. Now, without further delay, please enjoy this discussion with Dr. Amy Shah.
All right, everyone. Today we have an awesome guest with us, Dr. Amy Shah. Amy, how are you today?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm great.
Awesome. Well, I've been following you for a while now on Instagram. I forget, how long have you been on Instagram for now?
So officially, I've been on Instagram for years, maybe like 4 or 5 years, but I think I really started posting and being more present about a year and a half ago.
Okay, yeah, because your growth has been insane. I remember following you and you probably had about 13 or 14K, and now you're up to, 100,000 or more. So it's just been awesome to see your growth with, with everything educational. And that's exactly why we brought you on here, is you just have so much knowledge. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of how you started up, what made you kind of want to go into medicine?
My journey is one that so many of you, I'm sure you can relate to. I was burned out. I didn't know how to take care of myself. I was in a situation where I knew I wasn't feeling the way I should be feeling. My energy levels were so low. I had poor digestion. I was having all these food sensitivities. And I was looking up things like our patients do, like adrenal fatigue and hormone imbalance and, gut health issues. And it's such a shame because I thought, why do I not know this knowledge, or why aren't we teaching other people this stuff that I'm coming across through my research? And I was a nutrition major undergrad, so I knew that there was like a foundation through food and gut health. So basically, I had this turning point when I had a really bad car accident at the worst possible time in my life. I had a car accident. I was starting my own new practice, and I had all this pressure to make it work. And then I had my second set of boards coming up. As you know, every time you subspecialize, you have to take another set of boards. And I had my and allergy and immunology is like 2 boards combined into one. And so I had that boards coming up. And I had two little kids, or I have two little kids still, but they were little then. And I was trying to be, do it all. I really wanted to be a great doctor. I wanted to be a great mom. I wanted to, feel good, look good. I want to figure out what my long-term career path was. And in the worst possible time, when I was supposed to be working on all of those things, I had this huge car accident. And for me, it was just a wake up call. I felt like when I looked back at the events of the day, it's always like that. You look back at the events and you see what pace of life you're living, and the fact that I was never present. When I was at a meeting, I was thinking about going home, and when I was going home, I was thinking about like what I should be doing for the next day. And when I was studying, I couldn't concentrate on any of those things. So that few weeks that I had to take off because I was literally like unable to go to work, and my car was in the shop, I had to make a plan to change my life. It was it was not a choice anymore. So that's really what spurred me. That was when I started to write about wellness and health. I started to listen to podcasts like yours and read some books and start to formulate my own plans for myself and the people who are interested. So that's basically how I started.
Yeah, and so when you talk about your car accident, I mean, I'm sure, like you said, we all have those moments where we're always thinking about the next day, right? We can't slow down. We're shoving
Yeah.
food into our mouths. We're burning out, essentially, right? And you
Yeah.
wrote a book on it called I'm So Effing Tired.
Yeah.
Take us through kind of the moments leading up to that car accident, maybe. What were your thoughts, going up to that? Because I think we know burnout isn't just a single strike. It's something that builds up in us and then our cup overflows almost.
Yeah. And I think that there's so many times in our lives that we experience burnout, but I think the
Hmm.
intensity for me was because I was now a mom and the stakes were higher. It wasn't just like passing or failing a med school exam, or it
Right.
was like I wasn't going to be successful as a physician if I didn't get my act together. I was going to fail as a mom. It's not like these responsibilities and the stakes were just so much higher. And I found that my old coping techniques, um, one, didn't work, and two, I almost didn't allow myself to do it because it almost so things like going for an exercise or like a nature walk or run felt to me like I was being selfish because I thought, oh my God, with all my free time in the evenings after my kids go to bed, I should be studying, getting my practice materials ready for the next day, working on the finance part of my practice. I mean, the messages to us are that to be successful in this world, you must work at all costs. And it's a badge of honor to be burned out and burning the candle at both ends, as we say. I mean, in training and in medical school and after, it is like you're proud to say that you overworked and that you didn't sleep and that you gave up all your hobbies and free time. And so that's what I did. I basically gave up everything I thought was considered free time or, time I controlled. And I put it all towards what I thought were my bigger priorities. And what happened is I ended up getting deeper and deeper into this burnout and the state of illness that, a lot of us live in. And so that's it was getting to the point where I was really anxious all the time about, what was going to happen next. Like, I not only had to worry about the finances of the practice, but of, the patient care, like, was I doing everything right? Because this was real world. Like, this was, like I said, the stakes were just so much higher at that point. And I think that's what really culminated before the car accident. And of course, no one event can change everything. But when I look back at it, I was like, oh yeah, that is when I really said, I need to make a big change. And then it kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, Dr. Shah, you talk about the badge of honor. I think about one of our previous guests, Max Schenk, who talked about when most people in today's society look at these awards as the badge of honor and the certificate of suffering that he talks
Yeah.
about, right? And we kind of wear that on our sleeve, and busy is good, busy, busy. And he was talking about how he doesn't even like it other people are busy. And I feel the same way. When people can just sit back and relax, I'm happy. Unfortunately, I might have picked the wrong profession for that. But the behavior that you've been modeling and what you've routinely talked about, and things that I want to touch on, particularly in medicine and how we can help combat and some of the strategies. But it's not just unique to medicine, right? I mean, it seems to be an epidemic in pretty much any specialty, any field. But I'm curious, you touched on a concept of adrenal fatigue.
Mhm.
Say more about that. What does that mean?
So, adrenal fatigue, as it's described on the internet, is really inaccurate. We basically have an HPA axis, so hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and it's like a highway. And the way I describe it in my book is like it starts in your brain, then it sets off like a busy highway, like you would find in any big city, where there's exits and on ramps and off ramps. But if there's an accident anywhere in that system, you're going to get a slowdown in the entire system. And so, what seems like it's coming from the adrenals can be coming from your brain, can be coming from your thyroid, can be coming from, your ovaries for women, your testes for men. It's not a singular problem that you can supplement your way out of. And so that is something that I learned because I thought, wait, adrenal fatigue, we never learned about this. And then the more I realized that it was this concept that's mostly talked about in alternative medicine and functional medicine, but I realized a real issue here is a hormonal imbalance that often stems from poor gut health, poor mind-body connection. It's not necessarily because you have too little or too much of hormone. It's that these other regulators, like your brain and your gut, are off balance. And so it's causing this whole slowdown of the whole system.
Yeah, and kind of what you're discussing here is to kind of the dysregulation of the endocrine system, which, in medical school, when we learn about that, we're always looking at the data, right? We're looking at the lab findings, looking at TSH, you're looking at growth hormone, things that you touched on. But often it's not rooted, those things don't light up. For instance, I know you've talked about your story when you saw some physicians and the lab values came all clean. And people said, hey, actually, tell us more about that. Like, what happened there? And then, how often have you seen that with your patients when everything looks okay on paper, but the patient in front of you tells you, I'm so effing tired. What's up?
All the time. Think about it. Our system, our entire medical system is based on, catch me when I fall medicine, or like pick me up after I've hurt myself. It is not meant to make you stronger. Like, you guys do sports medicine, like it's about building up those muscles, building up that body so that you don't actually fall in the first place. It's not only about catching you when you're completely broken and on the ground. And so what happens when you check hormones and you check all these labs, we are equipped to see major deficiencies, like, if your cortisol is 0, or, you have true broken organs and hormones, you will find it on your blood work. But often what we are dealing with hormonal imbalances is subtle hormonal imbalances, things that are still within the realm of the huge normal. Even though it's not normal for you, it looks like it's a normal range. And we just don't have the tools to pick up on the nuances. We really don't have the testing. I see people for food sensitivities and GI issues all the time. And they ask me, like, so why can't you just test me for the things I'm allergic to, or and they're not talking about true food allergies. They're talking about GI sensitivities, or, food intolerances, which we don't have the ability to detect. And same with hormonal imbalances. We just don't have the ability to check for that in the blood, no matter what everyone tells you. People get confused because they check on the internet. They're like, well, I saw that you can get a test for this and you can get a test for that. And because there's so much competing information and misinformation on the internet, but they're, like so many people, I went to the smartest colleagues and I got the best testing available, and everything was within normal limits. And it was embarrassing because I could have sworn that something was going to be way off. And that was, they said to me, you're getting older, you have a lot of stress in your life. This is, common to feel this way. And so I kind of felt embarrassed and like, defeated when I left, because I thought, wow, I just wasted a lot of time and energy. And I feel like I was one of those doctors all don't want to be that patient that's like annoying and getting blood testing for no reason. And I felt like that. And I knew in my mind that something was wrong, but I didn't, there's nothing that came up. So I basically had to do my own research and try to figure it out. And that's really what my journey has brought me to, is that there is a difference between optimization and just living. Like what I was doing was living the default life, which is a fast track to burnout. And what I wanted to do is live a life where, was sustainable, was healthy, where I felt good. I started to really get interested in anti-inflammatory lifestyle and diet, and the blue zones. The blue zones were around the world. These are areas that people live long, healthy lives over 100 and are still functional. I mean, that's like the goal, right? So started to study what those people were doing, and what the research was saying about how to eat and how to live. And I slowly started changing things that are super easy. And that's why I talk about them. My Instagram handle is FastingMD, because a few years ago, I started to talk about this, and people are like, oh yeah, we know about the anti-inflammatory food. We know, you're not supposed to eat processed food. We know walking and exercise. But what is this other thing you're talking about? This whole, intermittent fasting, circadian rhythms. What is that? And so I ended up educating people a lot on that topic, and becoming kind of the expert in that area. And of course, now I want to change it back, and I can't, because Instagram has like blocked me from like, it's like, I literally have tried, like I own Dr. Amy Shah also, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how to contact Instagram, because they won't let me change it. So I'm stuck.
Well, it's not a bad handle to be stuck on, I don't think. But it's interesting that you tell that anecdote about your experience when you kind of, the labs are saying you're okay. I mean, I've been there, and I think that sometimes just you kind of have to look in the mirror and say, oh well, I'm a resident. I guess I'm supposed to be exhausted all the time. And I think that probably there's to an extent that might be true. This is a harder part of our lives. I mean, you've been there. We all have to kind of get through that. But I think that a lot of what you've just described is you talk about this as being subclinical, right? That things don't pop up is kind of what you're touching on. But something interesting I thought of that I think you mentioned on another show is that there's this rift between conventional medicine or conventional Western medicine, and let's call it, again, alternative medicine. And for the listeners, I'm throwing heavy quotes on alternative because, Darsh and I don't see it that way, right? And I suspect you don't either from what we've followed your work. But where's that middle ground, right? Where as physicians and our colleagues, we don't dismiss these advanced or even basic testing and appreciate them as data points in the context of the bigger clinical picture, but also don't go so far where we're ordering unnecessary testing that's burdening the system or the patient and treating with things like supplements and just homeopathic concoctions, et cetera.
This is such a difficult topic because right now, because of the pandemic, there's been a bigger divide. It's almost like you have to pick sides. And there's been this huge rift between physicians that are classically trained and alternative, or whatever, like you said, the heavy quotes, quote unquote, alternative world. So there's exactly what you said. There's a huge continuum. There's all different types of alternative practitioners. There's people like us three, who live in that middle ground. And, we might all be a little bit different in that middle ground. But we're not completely like, oh, if it's not evidence-based, it's trash. And we're not like, well, everything evidence-based is trash. So we're in the middle here, and we live in this kind of difficult place because we're trying to match the science to our practices, but we don't need it to be like verified for 10 years. Like it takes about 8 to 10 years for any new studies to be incorporated into guidelines. And I think that's way too long. With the amount of new research we have, we don't need to be waiting 10 years before we start doing intermittent fasting, or when, things like circadian rhythm management. These are all new ideas that should become normal practice in the next 10 years, but we don't need to wait that long. I think that's where we're all at. But there is a really big divide, and it's really difficult because I have been on podcasts where we've had arguments, kind of like, not necessarily arguments, but lots of disagreements off the air and on the air, because there's some subjects, like COVID is one of them.
Mhm.
Do you, even the fact, do you believe in COVID, or do you believe that there should be conventional treatments? I mean, these are things that are unfortunately becoming a divide between the different types of practitioners we have in our world. So it is a crazy place, but I love that I have a special role, I think, in this world, because I can bring in my background, my specific background, like you guys can too, in informing. My opinions are informed. They're not just random
Mhm.
opinions. I try not to just throw in my opinion based on nothing but my experience. I try to see, hey, this is my experience. What does the data say about this? And try to stay in that ground as much as possible. Now, of course, I have opinions, I have experience, like just like you guys do, but it's a difficult place to be in, I would say, at this time. A good, special, but difficult place.
Yeah. I mean, Amy, I cannot thank you enough for saying that. I think it mirrors what Altamont and I have talked about throughout this podcast, even in our lessons learned episode. And we always talk about evidence-based isn't necessarily always data. I mean, yeah, that's part of it, but anecdote also plays a huge role, right? I mean, as we try to personalize medicine for the future, patients are starting to become more individualized, right? And looking for their own health, not necessarily treating for the masses. So, like you said, medicine's gray, and we'll never know something or everything about something. There will still always be something more, and it's important for us to stay skeptical, but also inquisitive, and delve into further research for everything, right? And I think about our ancestors, right, taking turmeric, right? I mean, it's been around forever, and the reason it's been around forever is probably because it works. But now that we have data, people are starting to say, well, this data didn't really show anything, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, again, people have to look at both sides of the spectrum. So I just want to thank you for saying
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, just to further that point, though, I grew up. My parents are from India. I was born there, and we didn't come here until I was 5 years old. And I really shunned Ayurveda and
Mhm.
Eastern medicine a lot, because I felt like, oh, my Cornell nutrition training is so much better than what my grandmother and my mom was saying, and my medical school training kind of negated some of the things that I had learned
Right.
traditionally. And I just was like, those people don't know anything. It wasn't until late, I think it was during my immunology fellowship, that I was like, wait a second, a lot of this stuff is things that we talk about in Eastern medicine, and things that my parents, or my grandparents especially, advised us to do. So that's when it started to come back to me. And definitely now I realize, wow, there was a lot of knowledge in those sages that we are just learning makes sense now. Like the crazy power of mixing turmeric with black pepper and oil
Mhm.
and activating it. I mean, how would they know that thousands of
Right.
years ago? It's insane,
Yeah,
right? Like, so that
absolutely.
kind of stuff is very
Yeah,
interesting.
and Altamont has a great quote. What is it? I reserve the
It's
right to
not
change my mind.
mine.
Well, it's not yours,
Yeah, I
but I
reserve
forget
the
who you
right to,
quote.
yeah.
Yeah, I
I
reserve the
reserve the
right
right
to
to change
change
my
my
mind. Yeah.
mind, which is how
Yeah.
we all need to kind of be, right? Awesome. Well, Amy, I wanted to get a little bit back into the science, because you mentioned cortisol, right? And we know that cortisol kind of spikes in the morning, dips, and then it has its own kind of rhythm, as well as almost all the hormones in our body do. So, what is so important about circadian biology, or the ultradian rhythm?
Yeah, circadian rhythms, they control 80% of our genes. Okay, so 80% of
Wow.
genes work on a circadian pattern. We need the sun, we need darkness to inform this. That's the largest input that we have. So our clocks are independently running, but they need to get these inputs through light, and then the secondary is like food and temperature, and they need um, to run properly, they need these. And you can break your clocks by chronically disregarding these things. So light and darkness is not just for fun and mood boost, which obviously it is. It's also to give input to our brain so that it can send signals to all of our cells that, hey, yes, it's morning. Hey, yes, now it's evening. And we have special retinal receptors that go like directly to the hypothalamus, to the circadian center, that gives this input. And they can tell between sunrise and sunset and midday, and all those light rays are programmed. It's insane how our body literally looks at that and determines what to do next. So when you're sending your body, your brain signals of light in the morning. So technically, we should all be, if we didn't live in homes and didn't have blackout curtains, we'd all get that input naturally in the morning. But for most of us, or many of us, maybe most of us, we're not getting any light input in the morning. And Windows actually block out at least 50 times less effective through Windows. Oh, look, it's my screen's clear.
There we go.
Windows block out this light by 50 times. So you really need natural light in the morning to go to your circadian centers and tell it that it's daytime. And then again, at night, we're not supposed to be seeing bright blue light. We're not supposed to be intaking all the bright lights that we do through our computer, through our phones. And when we do, we're sending signals to our brain that it's not time to sleep, that there is a danger, that, Darce is in danger. Don't let him fall asleep, because there's some imminent danger. Somebody's chasing him, or he's being hunted. And so that's why we can't fall asleep. And that's why our brain is on hyper alert and cannot go into the states of repair and renewal. So circadian rhythms is not just about getting nice, fun nature time. It's about really getting those inputs so your body can work correctly. And just like your brain, your GI tract needs a break from food in order to repair and renew. I mean, we know all about that through sleep. Like, the brain needs rest, the brain needs time to renew, solidify memories, and complex processes. Same thing with the gut. We need to have a break from food in order for our gut to repair and renew. And it works on a circadian pattern, just like the rest of our body.
Yeah. And, I've definitely talked about Dr. Sachin Panda's work more than once. And I think that his book, The Circadian Code, which Darsh still has to read, is definitely one of my favorites, because it kind of outlines everything that you're talking about, how every single organ is operating on its own clock, right? Earlier you mentioned that getting light, obviously first thing in the morning. I mean, we did a whole show with Rudy Nasser to talk about that. We'll link that in the show notes. But what about folks who are maybe on the East Coast, where we're still doing daylight saving? Well, everywhere we're doing daylight savings time, except maybe 1 or 2 states. But maybe if we get up early, is your state?
We don't do daylight.
Arizona
do it.
They do.
That's why I moved here.
Is that really?
Yeah. No,
that's awesome. Well, what about what about if for people who get up early in the day and they don't have access? Because I think that you've recommended it, and for most people, within the first 30 minutes to an hour, you want to try to get as much sunlight as you can, right? Mm-hmm. Are there any recommendations that you'll make that they can get some of that light?
Night shift workers and people who work in dark environments, our bodies still need light input, or not necessarily need, but will work optimally when you have light input before, say, 10 a.m. That's what I recommend. It's get some light before 10 a.m. If you're at work already, maybe you walk outside for a few minutes. You really just need ideally 8 to 10 minutes, but even if you got 1 to 2 minutes of direct sunlight, you would feel so much better. So for night shift workers, I have this whole post where I go through some of the options for you. The real deal here is, no matter what your work schedule is like, your body still works on a light and dark schedule. Your GI still functions, your brain still functions on light and darkness. And so even if you're working all night, your body will never shift and switch, because the minute it sees sunlight, it can tell that that's daytime, and it will turn on the daytime functions. So you're never going to switch your body cellular clocks or your brain central circadian clock. So you have to work with it. For example, if you are finishing your night shift, for people who work overnight, get some daylight when you're done and come, see some morning light. And even if you're going to go to sleep, eat your biggest meals during the light hours, because that's when your digestion is most likely to work well. For example, melatonin, 2 to 3 hours before bed, not only binds to your brain receptors, but it also binds to your liver and your GI tract, and tells your pancreas to shut down the production of insulin, and to tell your gallbladder, to tell all of your GI organs to stop producing the enzymes that it needs to digest, to start to go into repair mode. So if you try to eat a huge meal at midnight, you're going to have reflux, you're going to have insulin resistance, you're going to feel really bloated the next day. I mean, that's how our body works. And so it's really tough when you work crazy hours. And I tell people, if they have the option of resetting their circadian rhythms, like, you have the option often as a night shift worker to get a few weeks of days, or get a week or two of washout, or people who live in really, really dark places, to buy one of those sun lamps from Amazon that you can keep in your office or place, so that you can get some light. And even if you live on the East Coast, a cloudy day is very good still at helping you with these circadian rhythms. You don't need like a bright Bermuda sun. You need just a little bit of daylight.
I mean, that's interesting to me because, obviously in residency, as you remember, you probably don't do any night shifts anymore, do you?
No.
Okay. All right, cool. But some of us still
close.
do. And when we're like post call or something and you haven't had a good night of sleep, I would always put my glasses on or whatever. And just because I wanted to go and obviously say, hey, if I'm getting that response, kind of what you've already explained, then it's going to be more difficult for me to get that good quality sleep. I mean, we know that I think the three best things that are going to help modulate the rhythm is, you've already touched on light, right? Food is another one, and then movement, exercise, and that kind of stuff. But what you're suggesting is, if somebody, let's say, clocks out at 7 a.m, and if they're going to have their biggest meal, that sleep quality is probably going to be impaired. So how would you counsel, let's say, a medical trainee who's doing that?
So everybody has different schedules. So the goal here is to get as much of your food intake during daylight hours as possible. So you could potentially sleep first, wake up, and then you have your biggest meal of the day before, as long as it's not late in the day, like it's not 8 p.m. or later. Does that make sense? So maybe you sleep till 4 or 5 p.m. and then you wake up and you have your biggest meal. That would be ideal for someone who, if you're getting adequate sleep, and then you could still have your circadian rhythm. And as you know, night shift work is an independent predictor of mortality in people. Why? Because of, you can only trick your body so much into thinking it's daytime. So luckily for you, I hope that this is temporary, but for a lot of people, it's their jobs. They work. I mean, we live in a 24/7 world, and a lot of people have the responsibility of working night shifts for long periods of time. So I suggest, when I counsel them, when I have a few people I work with that are doing this, I ask them if there's an option to do a 1 to 2 week washout every month, and to kind of change their shift of behavior a little bit. So they're eating very little overnight and most of their calories during the daylight hours.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. So one of the strategies you kind of talked about is fasting, right? And we talked a lot about how food is, also plays a role in terms of our rhythm. But what about the elimination of food? How does fasting help us combat a lot of these ailments that you were talking about?
As you know, digestion is a parasympathetic activity, and when you're in danger or you're ill, your body will divert resources to deal with the problem at hand, right? So you really want to remember that fasting can really aid in repair, renewal, in dealing with GI issues. Like, most of the people I talk to that end up doing some kind of circadian fasting are like, wow, my digestion's better, my gut health issues are improved, my energy levels are better. It's because they were living this very unnatural life, which we consider normal, of eating until late into the evening, having your last wine or chocolate like right before you go to bed, and literally waking up and rolling out of bed and having your first meal. I mean, Americans really don't even stop eating for more than 8 hours. During a 24-hour period. And so what ends up happening is that people get, GI issues, they have a fatigue, it's like being jet lagged, the way you feel when you don't get enough sleep ever. It's the same issue when you're eating super late at night. And if you look at your glucose, people that have continuous glucose infusions, they basically can deal with this glucose until about 8 o'clock at night. And around 8 o'clock at night, our insulin sensitivity goes way down. Our ability to take glucose into our cells goes way down, and your blood sugar shoots up with the same infusion that was going 24 hours. You start to have impaired ability to process that around 8 p.m. So that just tells you that it's just pure science. It's not like, oh, I'm telling you to fast to lose weight. It is this process. And we know that insulin resistance and high blood sugars are the cause of pretty much every major of all the diseases of kind of metabolism today.
Now, Amy, is there a minimum effective dose that you tell your patients for how long they need to fast?
It's funny, but even 12 hours is a difficult task for so many people. And it sounds so easy, right? Oh, stop eating at 7, start eating at 7 a.m. But you ask someone to do that, and then they realize how much they actually snack and how much they actually need. And so Ruth Patterson, she's a cancer researcher, has great studies on breast cancer survivors. And what she decided is that she was going to give breast cancer survivors really easy fasting instructions, like overnight fast, 13 hours, like have an earlier dinner than you're used to, fast for 13 hours, and nothing really much else besides that. Because she thought these people are stressed, they can't be doing 24 hours or even 16-hour fasting. And she found a 34% reduction in breast cancer recurrence in the group that was doing the circadian type overnight fasting. 13 hours, that's all you needed to make a difference in that cancer recurrence state. So if you can imagine that 13 hours gives you these kind of results. So what I have been asking people to do is that is the most tolerable fast, is a 13-hour or 14 or 15 when you get better at it. These are things that all of us can do. Busy people with crazy lives and very little time to prep. And I think of it like exercise. Not everyone needs to be doing a marathon or a triathlon, right? That is what 3-day fasting is. That is what 24-hour fasting is. These are marathons, and these are extra credit, great merit, but not for everyone. Everyone doesn't need to be doing these things, but everyone could be, exercising for an hour a day or 45 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day. And that's what I think of as a circadian fast. It is something you could easily do in your crazy life that doesn't require a huge shift in your lifestyle.
Yeah, actually, it makes it easier, right? When you don't have to think about your next meal and you're already busy. It's just, sure, you just got to get over those hunger pangs, but then, after 30 minutes to an hour, drink some water, you're through it. So
it's really not that hard. Just like anything, when you create a habit, you fire your neurons, and neurons that fire together wire together. And so when you create a habit and you keep doing it over and over again, it becomes old hat, and then it becomes the default. Like for me, now it's the default, and it took a lot. We always talk about, is it 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, but at some point it became default. And now a 13-hour fast is easy for me. If I want to do more, it's still hard and I still have to work at it. But these are things like, if you're having trouble, someone's trying this for the first time and they fail, back off. if you couldn't do 16, do 15, 14, 13, 12, and start there and then get used to it and then go to the next level.
I love that you're talking about individualizing it to the patient in front of you. And I think just going back to the circadian fasting thing, one of my fears is all of us, I think, here can agree that we're talking about insulin sensitivity, right? For example, you mentioned later in the evening, during the dark hours, we're going to be more insulin resistant. My fear is that a lot of times when patients hear this information, it's hard for them to digest, right? And they don't understand the art of medicine, and they'll be like, "Oh man, but if I eat later in the day, I'm gonna put it into places where it's not supposed to go," and then they'll start skipping meals, and that kind of feeds into that cycle of high cortisol, burnt out. I mean, in your book, you talk about individuals who exercising and just getting up 4:30 and working it out 6 days a week and extra sessions because exercise is good for you. So with the same idea that if fasting is good for you and maybe eating late in the day is not good for you, they might not do that. Like, for instance, let me give you my own case study, right? For me, if I'm working till 6:30, if I'm working from 6:30 a.m. to 6:30, and then I can only get my training session, a 60, 90-minute training session, and I get home at 8:30, 9 o'clock, if that's really going to be my biggest meal of the day, not ideal. But we also know that exercise helps increase insulin sensitivity, right? So there's other ways to modulate that. And for me, I kind of struggled with that for back and forth. And I was like, oh man, I really prefer to have a bigger meal in the day, but also I like to have my carbohydrates either pre-workout or post-workout, whatever it might be. So I think that's also important to keep in the back of my mind, and that's where the individualized approach comes. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to that. I'm sure you see people like that all the time.
Yeah, all the time. I would, if you were my patient and you were trying to fast optimally, I would say exactly having your biggest protein content within an hour of your training session. But not necessarily having your biggest carbohydrate meal after your training session. So the timing of protein is pretty important if you're trying to build or keep lean muscle mass within that hour of your training session. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the largest meal of the day. It might by default be the larger meal of the day, but I would say you could throw in another large meal at some point in your daytime practice, like maybe lunch becomes a large meal as well. And so what you're doing is after your workout, you're getting that protein intake, but not necessarily the huge carbohydrate or processed food intake. And as long as you are kind of timing your meal so that you're getting definitely some food during the day and some food after your workout, and maybe it's a compressed window, but you're getting that food. And then maybe say you eat at 8:30 or 9, and then you give yourself a good overnight fast. That would be how you could optimize that. And maybe, I don't know if you ever have a chance to do this, but doing one more mini workout before you break your fast in the morning, that would be ideal. Fasted workout.
Yeah. And then just tinker with it, right? See how we
Yeah.
respond to it. I mean, that's kind of what it is, and get the feedback. And I imagine you do that all the time.
I do. The best results I ever get is like sometimes I have a chance to do a later in the evening workout and to have a smaller meal after that late evening workout and start the fast and then do a quick mini fasted workout before you break your fast again. And you'll see because timing your workouts around meals anyways has been known for many years to be optimal, right? You have the best absorption of protein and nutrients. And if you can do that kind of at at night and then in the morning do a mini one, you can get great results. Try it.
On that note, are you doing some form of intermittent fasting daily?
So almost daily, yeah. If circadian fasting is so short, 12 to 13 hours. Sometimes I'll do just 12 hours if I had a late night meal and I usually tell people that you can have one day where you are completely off any kind of counting. You don't need to, basically a day off from training, just like that, a day off from your fasting training, and then be refreshed and ready to go again on a Sunday night, say.
What are your other non-negotiable daily practices?
I think one thing is morning light. I think that became a non-negotiable. And again, it doesn't have to be bright sunlight. I happen to live in this crazy bright sunny place, and I'm lucky, but I was in LA for a few days last week, and I realized it was like it just happened to be really gray in the mornings, but just getting that nature time in the morning has become kind of a non-negotiable. It can be like, I tell people, it can be as simple as, I don't park in the physician parking. We have like a special covered parking lot for private practice physicians in my building only. And I don't park there because that is, one, covered indoor, and two, it doesn't give me a chance to walk. So I park at the very last spot, and then I look like an idiot because I'm carrying like 1,000 bags, but I walk in the sun or in the daylight, and I take the stairs. I have to do all this stuff to get to my office. And like I said, in the first few weeks, it was work. I had to think about it every time. I was like, oh shoot, no, I'm not parking there. I'm parking over there. I'm walking. And then eventually it became second nature, and I can't even find my parking pass anymore to get into that garage.
I love that. That's awesome. And we talk about like supplement stacking, but you're trying to pair things together. And that's kind of what I do. Again, I'm very much an auditory learner. And so it's either audiobooks for me,
Me too.
or podcasts or whatever it is that I'm listening to. And it's, just putting my headphones on, going for a walk first thing in the morning. And, I used to tell Darsh, one of my first things that I used to do is just get up and kind of do like this 5-minute flow thing that one of our previous guests, Max, but now it's rather than get that sunlight outside, and it's been super helpful. And also that's allowed me to kind of delay that caffeine that I needed first thing in the morning.
Yes.
And, because let that natural cortisol rise kind of kick in. And Dr. Huberman talks about this at length, about all the benefits of that. So I'd love to come back to the concept of, the beginning of this conversation, we started with your journey and burnout and medicine. And, I mentioned a couple of times that it is challenging being a trainee, right? And you trained at some of the most prestigious institutions in the world on the East Coast. And the East Coast lifestyle is a little bit different, as you know. We're a little more fast paced.
Get out of there as soon as you can. Just kidding. Love the East Coast.
I know it's the weather, not so much, but otherwise, yeah. But the concept of just fatigue and emotional exhaustion in healthcare, which was even more amplified over this past 1.5 years, 2 years with COVID and everything. It seems to be so normalized, right? And just talking about mental health and in the context of burnout and fatigue, and I need a wellness day. I mean, that's just stigmatized, right? And more importantly, trainees don't want to burden their comrades, but oftentimes, depending on the culture of wherever they're practicing, it's more like they don't want to seem like they're weak. They can't stick it out. They can't handle it. Some of the things that you've talked about before. How do we help our colleagues, because Darsh and I are still trainees, or how do you, when trainees rotate with you, how do you help influence them or help them, reformat their thinking, and that, hey, take that day, you need that day, and it's not going to be in the world. You're not weak. You're not incompetent, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, unfortunately, being a resident is very akin to being a South Asian. Okay, so as a South Asian, I grew up. You have to respect everyone. Like, it doesn't matter who that person is, but if they're older than you, if they're more experienced than you, then you have to respect them, even if they're mean, if they're abusive, if they're mean to you, you're supposed to be even kinder. I mean, that's the culture, right? So you cannot. That culture is, you don't have boundaries. They are allowed to do whatever they want, say whatever they want, ask for whatever they want, and you have no ability to say no. And that's a problem, right? As we get older, and as I've gotten older, I've understood that it doesn't matter what their kind of ranking is in your life or in your culture or in the medical culture. You are allowed to keep your own boundaries. And that's easier said than done. When you're a trainee, you can't have a lot of boundaries. But you have to have some non-negotiables. If it's something that is going to impinge on your mental health, you have to stand up. You have to be like, that person who looks weird or bad and say, you know what, I can't do that. What you're asking me to do is going to impinge on my personal health, and I can't do that. And keeping strong boundaries and allowing residents to say that, like just like in our culture, like in a South Asian culture now, we are learning that it's okay, even if it's a senior person in your life, you are allowed to say you are toxic, or at least in your mind say that person's toxic, I'm not going to spend time or give that person my energy. The same way we have to allow residents to say, if someone is crossing that boundary where you feel like you're going to be a danger to yourself or others, or you're feeling like you're getting to the end of your line, you are allowed to say, hey, I can't do that. I need to take some time off. And it has to be okay. We have to normalize that. And that's my advice for everyone. I mean, for a long time, even after I came out of training, I was still in the mindset of, I need to impress everyone. I need to make everyone happy. And when you're trying to make everyone happy, inevitably you will end up unhappy. And so you have to learn to have some health and mental health, especially boundaries. And this is why in medicine we have such high rates of suicide and depression and addiction, because we never learned that, or we're never allowed that. So that's something I learned the hard way, and I would highly advise to all of you to talk to your colleagues and then people under you and people over you and say, hey guys, we need to figure out how we can allow this for ourselves and our colleagues.
Yeah, I love that, Amy. What you just said kind of gave me all the feels. I mean, me being at 29, looking at how my parents raised me, right, and in our culture, and looking at the trajectory of my career right now, being a trainee, and seeing how my childhood and the way I perceive the world has kind of shaped how I act, right? And I've learned that I'm a people pleaser, at the core. And it's very tough for me to say no. And learning that over time, and I mean, you've obviously gone through this, right? Through Instagram, you're getting asked by so many people, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And I get that a little bit here and there. And my first reaction is, yes, how can I make this happen, right? And I'm trying to change that mindset back to, well, free time is actually good time. I don't need to fill up every single hour of my day with something, right? And taking that time for yourself, that mental health, that break, learning to do meditation or mindfulness, and taking that time for yourself and valuing yourself is just so, so important. So like you said, for everyone out there trying to, change that mindset and be okay saying no. So thanks for that. I do also want to get your advice in terms of future doctors and trainees. So I do a lot of pre-med coaching, and a lot of the pre-med say, I kind of want to get into wellness. I want to heal people. I want to prevent ailments from happening. And what obviously we often see is people go to medical school. None of that is taught. You get sucked in almost all, quote unquote brainwash, I like to say, by institutions in terms of, hey, this is how you train. And then you go to residency and you never learn the wellness component of things. So when you get out, you have no idea how to even practice that. What kind of advice would you give to pre-med or medical students, in terms of learning the gray and, keeping in mind that component of wellness in medicine?
Okay, so whatever you're interested in medicine, you should pursue, whether it's wellness or some other part of medicine that is not taught to you. So this is kind of a tangent, but it really goes into this. They recently found out that life satisfaction peaks at 2 to 5 hours of time that you control. So that is not time where you're sitting on a couch, but time that you control. So if you're spending if you're spending 2 hours a day learning something new that you are in control of, no one assigned it to you, it is not required, there is no test, that is satisfying. That is going to grow you as a physician. That's going to grow you as a person. And that is what I recommend to anybody. Do take that time, do the thing that you feel like could help your career, help your personal health, could help your mental health, whatever it is. If you can control some parts of your day, I mean, it sounds like a lot, but that's what you need for life satisfaction. So at some point in your career, you need to find that time to really pursue something that you love. And maybe that's just independent learning. Maybe it's learning under a coach or a mentor. Maybe it's going to do some kind of fellowship or extra training. Unfortunately, in wellness, we don't really have like a set fellowship, or there's a bunch of like integrative medicine, functional medicine, and all kinds of new things popping up here and there, lifestyle medicine, obesity medicine. But I felt like to get that life satisfaction, I needed to do it on my own, and I needed to learn on my own. And I was lucky that I had the flexibility, or I could make the flexibility to make that happen for myself. And I highly recommend that people find what lights them up and do that for every day, for a little while, every single day.
I love that. And I think that another part of it, in terms of the wellness component, it's gone are the days where the doctor tells the patient, hey, this is what it is, and this is how we're going to go with the treatment plan, and they're going to go. I mean, today it's about empowering the patients. Patients are empowered, right? First of all, we have Google, and so you can find anything. The difficulty is filtering through the noise to get the actual signal, right? You touched on that with all the dissension and everything that's going on. It's either pendulum on one end or the other end. But one of the things that you've done a spectacular job, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're lecturing, and you're putting out so much great content and education. How do you educate your patients on having the discussions with their physicians? Like, for instance, going back to the subclinical stuff, like let's talk about thyroid or cortisol or whatever, and pick a hormone. We'll do thyroid just because it's so prevalent. That they go into their physician and say, I'm not feeling right. And, I heard on Medicine Redefined podcast that getting these levels checked are important. Maybe some physicians who, for lack of a better word, I would say aren't as open-minded or aren't into the wellness space, they might say, there's no clear indication for it at this point. But patients might not have a true, deeper understanding of why that's important, right? Maybe they haven't taken your courses. How do you educate those patients to have those conversations and discussion with their physician to make this shared decision making? Because I feel like a lot of times when patients go in and say, I need this test, and the physician's like, whoa, you don't need this test. Like, you know what I mean? How do you educate
Absolutely. That? I think that's a big, huge issue in medicine right now. But here's the thing. Most of the things that we are talking about that we discussed today don't require a test. They don't require any kind of equipment. They don't require any kind of special supplements or anything, really. You can do most of the stuff that we just talked about without any of that. Now, that being said, we have changed leaps and bounds in the last 5 years. You can order your own lab tests. In most states across the US, you can now go without a requisition to your lab and order tests. And I think that's like a huge difference from when I graduated from med school. You couldn't even get like allergy medicine over the counter. I mean, now you've really changed the entire system so that patients have a lot more autonomy and can get a lot of this testing on their own. And so I have a lot of people who say, oh, I ordered my own labs, or they used a site, one of these sites that interprets it for you, or they work with their doctor and their doctor is, willing to send a few extra labs. So it's kind of a combination of any of those three. But I agree with you that I think the problem is that in primary care, a lot of physicians are taught that you're supposed to utilize the healthcare system very judiciously and not waste money. And so then they end up not ordering tests, some of which are actually necessary. Like if you have a family history of diabetes and your hemoglobin A1C is okay, you still should get a fasting morning insulin to see if that's elevated, because that's an early sign of type 2 diabetes. And all people with a heavy type 2 diabetes history should be considering or looking at that fasting insulin, and that's something that's not included in your screening lab. So it's either a discussion with your physician or then it's getting your own lab work.
Quick follow-up on that. Do you, just as an early marker for just metabolic derangement, will you only check fasting insulin, or will you do an OGTT to check postprandial insulin as well?
Well, ideally you would do both, but it's much more difficult. So say you're seeing a patient virtually, or you're seeing a patient that doesn't necessarily have access to an OGTT. You can instruct them how to do it on their own, or a lot of people are getting these the blood sugar continuous glucose
CGMs.
monitors,
Mm-hmm.
CGMs, and that can be really helpful in looking at 2-hour postprandial and watching your blood sugars drop. And there's lots of controversy about whether normal people that don't have type 2 diabetes should be using these things, but in conjunction with a qualified practitioner, I think it can be really helpful.
Gotcha.
Cool. Well, Amy, this has been a super awesome, fascinating, effing awesome conversation. I can't thank you enough for coming on. I've been following your work for a long time, and I think the listeners will understand why now. So thank you again. We do want to ask you though, what's next for you? So you already have one book down. What's coming up the pipeline?
Definitely, I'm writing my next book.
Awesome.
That's coming up soon. So more about that soon. I have a free challenge that I just created. That's something I think you guys, I think any doctor who has knowledge or is willing to do, like, it was so cool. Basically for 60 days, every day you get like one step that like to add to your daily routine or to your meals or whatever, and really step by step in 60 days you'll be optimizing your life instead of just living your life as it is. And it was a lot of work to put together, but in the end I feel so happy and satisfied because I'm able to, like, in conjunction with my book, able to really impact people's lives. And that just grows my own personal presence, right? Like, by giving away a lot of free content, you are giving people so much value that they then want to buy your books, or they then believe in what you're saying, or they will spread the news. So it's literally like so worth it.
Absolutely.
Wait, speaking of, I want to come back. So your book is called "I'm So Effing Tired." Who's that for? Is it targeted towards healthcare folks? Is it just everyday people?
It's everybody. It's everybody. Yeah. And the thing I learned is that I think you guys are in the same position, so I can say this. What I learned is I felt like with this first book, I really wanted to make sure that I covered all my bases. Like, I wanted someone who's a layperson, a functional medicine or non-medical person to be able to read it, and a medical person to be able to read it. And I was trying to be that people pleaser. Okay. So I myself will tell you that I over explain. I give tons of evidence because I became the person that I've always been raised to be, like, make sure everyone's happy with you, like, don't make sure people don't say, like, oh, where does she get that from? The second book, I'm being much more bold and much less apologetic, and I'm just going to put it out there. And so I can definitely tell you that I've grown since writing that book, and I'm writing an addendum to I'm So Effing Tired to kind of reflect that.
That's exciting, because I remember you mentioning on another, I think maybe it was the Genius Life podcast, that one of the feedback or comments that you got were that, hey, this is just the basics. There's nothing, groundbreaking in this. And what I found so amusing about that is, everybody is looking for that magic pill, right? I mean, we talk about that all the time. So the more polarizing you can be, the more likely it's to work, right? It was like, oh man, this is awesome. But you're just kind of driving home the basics. And for, again, 90% of the time, maybe even more, that's what people need to focus on. And that's what your book is all about. So I really do love that.
I mean, people love to hear that lectins, all these things you've been eating all your life, are like silently killing you. I mean, unfortunately, you can say anything and it will sell lots of books, right? But you and I, we all have a responsibility. I mean, the way that we were trained and to do things that are actually true, or at least, backed by some kind of medical science. And so it's a little less like, take this pill and everything will be better, or do this crazy thing, like put butter in your coffee, like, and now you're automatically like supercharged or something. So it's a little harder to be saying things that people will think is new and fresh. But I really do think that some of this stuff, for me, it is new and fresh. And for most people, if you really look at your life, it is definitely new and different. And that's why I think the whole circadian fasting thing has taken off a little bit, because it is kind of counterintuitive to what we've been doing for all these years.
Right. Well, we are going to link all that in the show notes, and cannot wait for the new book. That's super exciting. What's Is there an expected timeline, or is it super early in
Yeah, it's coming next year.
Awesome.
So
awesome.
it seems so weird, but 2021 is almost over.
That's crazy.
I know.
I was just thinking, I'm like, oh my God, I'm almost done, but going to be done by December, and so it'll come out in 2022.
Stoked. Can't wait for that. Well, Amy, I want to thank you so much for doing everything you do, for being so generous with your time and just constantly educating and putting out the good word. As you mentioned earlier, there is a lot of misinformation and unfortunately a lot of disinformation as well. And I think one of my mentors came on here and said the only way to combat bad information is to spread good information. And you've done that over and over again. So thank you so much for everything you do. Where can, other than Fasting MD on Instagram, which you can't get rid of, so you're stuck with that. So people we'll plug that.
I'll be there forever until I die.
But even Amy Shah, right? That's the other one they can follow you. Maybe where else can people find you?
On Twitter, I'm at Amy Shah MD, and Facebook, Amy Shah MD, and my website is amymdwellness.com.
Awesome.
Cool. We'll link it all on there. Last question we ask all our guests, Amy, is how do we put the health back in healthcare?
Wow, you didn't prep me on this one, or maybe I didn't read the
surprise question.
How do we put the health back in healthcare? By empowering patients to do things in their life that actually optimize their health instead of just things that can fix them when they're broken.
I like it. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys, so much. I enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Amy Shah. Now, we discussed a few strategies that you may want to try to optimize your life, but by no means was this an exhaustive or all-inclusive list of things we can do. If you enjoy this, however, I highly recommend you follow Amy on social media and check out her website as well, all of which will be linked in the show notes. Also, for my doctors, remember, the story has changed. Visit financialresidency.com/locumstory to see if a locum tenens assignment is right for you. It's here you'll find the unbiased answer you're after, so you can decide if locum tenens is your next chapter. Now, before you sign off, please remember this important disclaimer that everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nor should it be construed as medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. We highly recommend that you seek the guidance of your personal physician regarding any specific health-related issues. However, if you enjoy the show, please be sure to subscribe, review, and share with anyone who you think will gain value from this. And until next time, thank you for listening.